Clara Alvarez adjusted the collar of her dark coat as she walked up the narrow path lined with fading autumn leaves. She had not planned on crying today. Not in public, not here, not in front of the world that expected her to be strong and composed. But the small cemetery on the outskirts of the city had a way of disarming even the most disciplined heart. She clutched the bouquet of white lilies that she had chosen with care in the early hours before the office opened and before the first. Calls of the morning reminded her of everything she still had to do. She paused at the small gray headstone, her fingers tracing the engraved letters that spelled out her son, Marcos, a boy who had always been larger than life to everyone around. Him and who had somehow seemed too small for the world when it finally took him from her. Clara knelt slowly, placing the flowers at the base of the stone, and inhaled deeply the crisp scent of the winter air mingling with the faint fragrance of the lilies and the earth itself. She remembered his laughter, which had once echoed through the apartment hallways, and the way his eyes had sparkled when he discovered something new at school or at the park. The grief had not lessened over the years. It had only shifted from a raw, burning pain to a dull ache that sometimes gnawed at her from within, while at other times it appeared in sudden flashes, making her feel as if she had never left the moment when the ambulance had pulled away from her life. She ran her hands over the letters again, whispering small apologies for not being able to save him or prevent the circumstances that had led to the accident at the busy intersection years ago. She stayed there longer than she had planned, allowing herself to remember the mundane things like his messy hair and the way he insisted on wearing his favorite jacket, even when it was clearly too warm. She allowed the tears to fall freely because there was no one around to see, and because, in this quiet place, she could finally speak the words she had rehearsed so many times alone at night. It was a ritual that gave her both pain and comfort, and one that reminded her that no matter how many board meetings or client negotiations filled, her days she would always be a mother first, and her heart would always be tethered to that small grave that demanded her presence. As Clara rose to leave, she noticed movement near the edge of the cemetery, a woman kneeling beside a smaller headstone, with a child clinging to her side. Their sobs were quiet, yet persistent, and they seemed almost out of place in the otherwise peaceful surroundings. The woman wore a brightly colored scarf that contrasted sharply with the gray of the tombstones, and the child held a worn, stuffed animal as if it could somehow absorb the grief they carried. Clara hesitated, taking a small step closer because she felt a strange pull toward them. The woman looked up, and their eyes met her own, filled with tears, and something unspoken that transcended language or nationality. Clara felt an unexpected recognition of pain that resonated deeply within her. She spoke softly in Spanish, asking if they were all right, and the woman nodded, but the tears did not stop. She motioned for Clara to come closer, and in her shaky voice she explained that they were visiting the grave of a husband and father lost suddenly in an accident, much like the one that had taken Clara's son. The child tugged at the woman's sleeve, pointing at Clara as if sensing some connection between them. Clara knelt beside them, sharing a quiet space of sorrow and memory. They spoke of their loved ones and the small routines they had left behind, and Clara felt a weight lift slightly, as she realized grief was not something to be suffered alone. The woman offered her hand, and Clara took it, understanding in that moment that they were strangers, yet united by the invisible threads of loss. They lingered together, watching the wind move through the bare branches and the sunlight fall on the gravestones in patterns that seemed to speak of hope, even in places defined by absence. After what felt like hours, the woman suggested they leave, and Clara nodded reluctantly. The child waved shyly at Clara, and she smiled, returning the gesture with a promise to remember both of them and the story they had shared on this quiet morning. In the car, on the way back to the bustling city streets, Clara reflected on the encounter feeling. Both melancholy and strangely invigorated, she realized that grief could be a bridge as much as it was a burden, and that by acknowledging the pain of others, she could honor her own loss more fully. The memory of Marcos felt less like a wound that might never heal, and more like a thread weaving through her life, guiding her actions and reminding her of love that transcended absence. She resolved to visit the cemetery more often and to reach out to those who suffered quietly in their own lives. She understood now that sorrow was not a solitary affair, and that in moments of connection even strangers could provide a glimmer of solace and understanding. Clara returned to her apartment feeling the weight of her professional responsibilities. Once more, but with a newfound awareness of the fragility and beauty of life. She carried with her the image of the Spanish woman and child and the quiet grace of shared mourning, knowing that this encounter would remain with her as a touchstone in the months and years to come, and that the lessons learned in that brief yet profound meeting could shape the way she lived, loved, and remembered.